Before we start, the last Thursday was the annual Yom HaShoah, a day to commemorate the killing of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. On this day, public life in Israel stopped during 2 minutes of silence throughout the country. Even in the highways, cars stopped, and most got out of their cars to observe the 2 minutes of silence. The memory of the Holocaust is very much alive in the minds of Jews, especially the Israelis, for it has no chance to rest. They as a nation are constantly enduring continuous and similar threats made against the survival of their own country. But there is a prophetic link to this title HaShoah, and I would like to start our study, of the Antichrist with this note. The title HaShoah is one that was taken from the prophecy from Gog and Magog, which is yet to happen. It is found in Ezekiel 38 verse 9, speaking to Gog, which is another title for the evil one or the dragon in Revelation, who will energize the Antichrist and the false prophet. God says you will ascend, coming like a storm, Shoah, covering the land like a cloud, you and all your troops and many peoples with you. This speaks of the northern invasion of Gog and his armies, among which are named, as we said before, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, whose armies are already at the northern border of Israel. And the word, again, like a storm, in Hebrew, kashoah, the term used by Israel to designate the Nazi Holocaust. And how strange that it is taken from a yet future prophecy to come. This is also the same period we have spoken about in our previous studies in Revelation 12 about the woman, Israel, who is persecuted by the dragon, that is Satan. One important information that is given in this chapter 12 is that Satan and his demons will be confined on this earth for the period of 3.5 years. This will be when the Antichrist, who has come on a white horse for the first 3.5 years, bringing false peace, will, at the beginning of the second 3.5 years, suddenly change his horse to the color red, signifying war, and to a black for famine, and then to greenish pale for death, as the text says in Revelation 6, speaking of the four horses of the apocalypse. Revelation 12, verses 7 to 9, explains for us the process. Let us remind ourselves with these words. They will help us to understand the presence of the Antichrist on earth in Revelation 13. And it says, and there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. And the dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. This is the moment when Satan and a third of the angelic world fell. They will come here in our planet as a defeated army. Imagine how angry and destructive evil can become. And this wickedness and destructive intention will be focused on Israel and also on all believers as well. We read in Revelation 12 as well. Verses 12, it says, woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted who? The woman who gave birth to the male child. When Satan and his kingdom will be thrown out from the heavens and confined to earth. By the way, the word throne found in verse 9 is the same as the one concerning the courts of the Gentiles. It refers to excommunication. They were kicked out of heaven. And because of his great wrath, and while his anger will extend to everyone, his main focus will be on the woman who gives birth to the male child. As Paul says in Romans 2:9, tribulation and anguish on every soul of man who does evil, to the Jew first, and also to the Gentiles. This is when the dragon will realize that his time is short, and as a wounded animal, he, through the Antichrist and the false prophet, actually will cause a lot of destructions in this earth. We will see that both the Antichrist and the other beast, the false prophet, will become irrational as they, being mesmerized and totally loyal to the dragon, also find the walls closing in. This is the Yom HaShoah still prophesied by most Hebrew Scriptures prophets, not only John. As difficult as it is, they need to know. The Jewish people, the world, they need to know what the Word says, and especially where we're heading to. You know, there's one example in history where we can compare the process towards madness of the Antichrist. In the last days of the reign of Hitler, this man was seen giving way to hysteria. He was angry at everybody. During the last delusional conferences, as his general called them, if someone brought him bad news, he accused them of betrayal. Then when he pored over his map and began to move imaginary armies around and gave instruction for battalions which scarcely existed, he would not and never concede defeat. He deluded himself into believing that the righteous would survive. And then, I don't know if you know, a most irrational thing happened. He got married. A marriage that lasted 40 hours, and then he committed suicide. That's the face of evil. Another example in history is Antiochus Epiphanes, if you remember, the one who shares many prophecies with the Antichrist. He also was chased out of a place and ended up in Israel and very angry. We recall how after his humiliating defeat in Egypt by the Romans, he was forced to immediately concede defeat. After such an embarrassing blow, he went where? To Judea, and began the wars described for us in the book of Maccabees. His anger and vengeance directed itself against the Jewish people with persecution, with killing, and he was the first to forbade them to exercise their faith. He even burnt the Bibles. These two individuals are really, I want to tell you, a vague comparison to the barbarous nature of the coming Antichrist. His rise and the beginning of his fall are described to us in chapter 13 of Revelation. This chapter is important. It will show us that while evil is loud and threatening and boasting, it has millions of strings attached to every one of its tendencies to refrain it. For at the end, what strongly comes out is God's sovereignty. Let us now begin to look at the text of Revelation 13. You can open up your scriptures to Revelation 13. We're going to read verses 1 and 2. It says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority." See how this individual is named. Again, beast, therion in Greek. This word describes a wild animal, a hunted animal. And this title, I want to tell you, is repeated 16 times just in chapter 13. For someone who wants to hide his identity, his name appears all over the place. Furthermore, his words, his action, even his thinking are laid bare for us. Hebrews 4:13 reminds us that there's no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare in the eyes of him. And so it is in the scriptures. And while we will learn so much about this individual, it is John himself in his first letter who gave him the name of the Antichrist. This name is made up of 2 words, anti, which means over and against, and the other word is Christ, the Messiah. The Antichrist then is the opponent or the counterfeit of Christ, of Yeshua. John mentions this name 5 times in his letters. 4 times in the singular, pointing to him, and once in plural, to include all those who are like him, that is, false teachers, those who work the word and transform it. John describes the Antichrist, by the way, as one who denies the Father and the Son. Paul as well speaks of him. He describes him as the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians, the son of perdition. Daniel also spoke so much about him in his book. He sees him as a willful king. and the insignificant horn. But John is going now to describe him in great details for us. John then begins by telling us that he is from, he rises up from the sea. What does that mean? Let us remember that the Bible very often, of course, interprets itself. The sea is a symbol of the nations of the world. This is why the Antichrist will not be Jewish. He would be a Gentiles. When Daniel had a prophetic dream, he relates it in Daniel 9:7-3 and said, "And 4 great beasts coming out were the sea, different from one another." And in verse 23 of this same chapter, the angel who was speaking to Daniel repeats the absolute viciousness of this person and his kingdom to come. And he says, "Thus says the angel, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it to pieces." Just in here, there are 3 things that this angel tells us that what this 4th beast will succeed in doing. Devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it to pieces. Each word is so powerful as the other 2. So at the end, there's not much left that survives. And notice that both John and Daniel see the same type of beast composed of the strength of a lion, a bear, and the agility of the leopard. But notice that both see the beast in reverse order. Daniel sees first a lion, then a bear, then a leopard. John sees first a leopard, then a bear and a lion. Perhaps this perspective is due to the fact that Daniel saw this whole beast rise to power, but John, who is brought to the very end, sees its fall, and he will describe it for us in this chapter. This represents powers, the powers of the nations. It began, by the way, with Daniel, the times of the Gentile, and ends with the second coming with John. Both these 2 perspectives can be seen as one is rising and falling like a stone you throw in the air, and very soon it has nowhere to go but where? Down. The vision of the 4th beast deeply affected Daniel, if you remember, in the last verse of chapter 7. And this speaks to us. In verse 28, he says, "At this point the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, and I kept the matter to myself." But I'm going to ask you a question. Why was John so affected, especially that he goes deeper into the life of the Antichrist? Perhaps because John has been well prepared for this encounter when in Revelation 1 he saw Jesus resurrected and victorious. With him, he was taken. We read in Revelation 1:17 that when he saw him, he fell at his feet as dead, but not so when he saw the beast, as ferocious and real as it is. John does not react in the same way because he had a great privilege to see, to feel, to talk to Yeshua. I want to tell you, after one sees and experiences the Messiah, evil loses much of its power to impress us. Even while the beast, the Antichrist is real, they are limited, and there is a lot of falsity and deceit going on in this most obvious as we get into the text. The point I want to make here is that the closer we are to God, the better we know our God, the better we know Him and are empowered by Him, the less the scary faces of evil will impress us. The evil one always wants to frighten us, to bring us into a state of panic. The best antidote is think of Yeshua. Memorize verses and say them. Once you have seen, once you have tasted the real thing, those in opposition are then seen just as they are, pretenders. What else can we learn from the first 2 verses? The Antichrist, it says, has 7 heads and 10 horns, and on the horns are 10 crowns. What do these things tell us? By the way, we don't have to guess, nor go too far to find out their meaning. The 10 horns are 10 nations, as described by both Daniel and John. This we know first by looking at Daniel's vision of the fourth beast, which also had 10 horns. And then the angel explains this to them. In Daniel 7:24, he says, the 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom. John also tells us in Revelation 17:12, and the 10 horns which you have seen are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom. See, prophecies are not that complicated, but they require work to go left and right within the scriptures. And so what we can say for now is that the final number of the nation which will follow the Antichrist will be composed of 10 powerful nations. We do not know who they are yet. There are a few alliances we can think of. Many point to the European Union, which has right now 27 members, or NATO alliance, which has presently 30 members. But the last number will be a confederation of 10 powerful nations who will unite under the Antichrist. This federation may include countries from Europe, from the Americas, from Australia. We remember that the opponents of the Antichrist would be the king of the north, just to place you in the prophecies. That is the leader of Gog and Magog, which countries are described in Ezekiel 38:39, included as well are the kings of the east. This one is plural, most probably an Asian confederation. The east is the rising sun in Greek, and the king of the south, who will lead the Arab and most probably the African countries, and Europe, and most probably the Americas, Australia, will be under the willful king, that is the Antichrist himself. All the continents are represented except for Antarctica. And where will they meet? Guess where? You see the arrow? Israel. I don't know if they can all fit there, but this is what the prophecy says. So the Antichrist is seen with 10 horns, but see that on his horns were 10 crowns. The crowns are not victor's crowns, but they are crowns or diadems a king wears. He crowned himself king, but after all, he is under the authority of and empowered by the prince and the power of the air, as we see in Ephesians 2. And this is his last chance to prove himself. But something happens to one of his heads. And this is when it becomes very interesting. Look at verse 3. And I saw one of his heads as it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. But actually, other verses tell us that it is himself that he actually is slain. We read in verse 12 that the false prophet will make the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. And again in verse 14, he makes an image to the beast who had the wound of his sword, that is, and has come to life. Why is it repeated so many times? And notice that stress, right, in there. Now the question is, was he really slain? Did he really die? And did he really resurrect? It looks like there's foul play here. There's a trickery. There's a lie. Let us remember what Paul says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11. For this reason, God will send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie, and that they all may be condemned, who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. This fake death and resurrection may be among the biggest lie the world will believe, and they will be so impressed that it says they will worship the Antichrist. But there is one word in the text which guides us to see that it is, I believe, a strong counterfeit. See the word slain. The last time we read about this word was in Revelation chapter 5, verse 6, when John saw Yeshua, and he says, I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne and of the four living creatures, in the midst of the elders, I saw a lamb as though he had been slain. Same word in the original Greek, for both the death of the Messiah and that of the Antichrist, or supposed death of the Antichrist. There is imitation and counterfeit here. Someone once said that if you wanted to reproduce true biblical Christianity, you would have to find someone to die and resurrect. It is very possible that this is what he's trying to do here and throughout the 3.5 years. The world will believe this lie and will go as far again as worshiping the Antichrist. There's a great truth about evil and God's sovereignty we learn here, by the way. God is very respectful of man. He lets man act as he pleases until man's evil reaches a point of no return. Then God takes over, and blessed be his name. Otherwise, it would be the end of humanity. After all attempt to bring men back, he sends them strong delusion. He does so after a long history of over 6,000 years, right, of patience. For God will not infringe in people's free will until that free will is completely marred with sin. And then he takes over. But what we have here is one of the many attempts of the Antichrist and the dragon to imitate the Messiah. For instance, have you noticed the last words of verse 2? And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. It sounds as though when God the Father gave authority and power and his throne to share with Yeshua. And just like Yeshua incarnates the power and authority of God, so the Antichrist embodies the power and authority of, that is, the beast. What we're witnessing in this individual, the Antichrist, is really a demonic incarnation. We're told that he comes from the abyss, and we're told in Revelation 11:7, the Antichrist will be an evil spirit which will inhabit a man and will therefore be able to make all these miracles. And later as well, as Yeshua sealed the 144,000, so the Antichrist will seal his own with the number 666. There's clearly a lack of originality in all this chapter coming from the Antichrist. Evil is like a lost beast, always trying to find a reason to be. This is why its desire will always be toward and against the truth with so many lies. But there's much worse. There's much worse. Listen to these words. They are very relevant. Look at verse 4. They worship the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worship the beast, saying who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him. See that they worship Satan. That's the dragon. Without knowing who he is. They only know the Antichrist. They only know the false prophet, but they don't know Satan. How is it possible to worship someone you don't know? While God denies them their supposed freedom, insisting that they need no crutch, little do they realize that they are dealing with an extremely intelligent being who will make the whole earth, those who deny the God of heaven, worship him. As Paul clearly explains it by making a distinction between true faith and the other religion. That's not true that they are the same, that they all lead to the same God. Look what he says in 1 Corinthians 10:20-21. He says, no, but I say that these things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I don't want you to become sharers in demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake at the table of the Lord and the other, which is the table of demons. These foreign religions in Corinth were described as sacrificing to demons, and their tables are called the tables of demons, just like the false teachers. Their doctrines are called the doctrines of demons. See how Paul divides the world into two? Those who worship God and the others who do not worship God, who are under Satan. And he follows the teaching of Jesus, who told them on the road to Damascus to go and what? Open their eyes so that they may turn from where? Darkness to light. From the dominion of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sin. See, there's no middle point here. No fence to sit on. Neither is there purgatory or cleansing of the soul. It doesn't exist in the scriptures. There are two ways in and after the world, darkness and light, Satan or God. For either we worship one or the other. And to be worshipped, by the way, must be the evil one's greatest desire. We've seen this. We remember the last temptation. He went as far, imagine, as asking Yeshua to fall down and worship him. Right? This is when Jesus says, okay, that's enough. Okay, he put him out. That is the world upside down. When a creature asks the Creator to worship it, he will get his way with the world, who will worship him, but only through deceit and only through a short time and through many lies. Have you tried to speak to someone who's a liar? Always trying to hide and to shroud his true self. You know, I want to tell you, it's very difficult. It's a difficult experience because the Bible orders us as believers to believe all things, 1 Corinthians 13. Meaning, believe as long as you can, giving all the possible benefit of doubt until it is clear that this person is a liar. But the process is exhausting and may take months and sometimes years before you can discover the truth about a person. Well, your spirit is disturbed. However, here we don't have to wait that long, because the Spirit unravels the true nature of the Antichrist right away. And the real identity of the Antichrist is given also in verse 1. Let's look at it again. We read that on his 7 heads were blasphemous names. What does that mean? The word blasphemous, blasphemia, sounds the same in Greek, describes slanderous speech, abusive words, which will characterize this individual. He will be like a control freak, and you know what happens when such a one loses control. His reaction will be seen very soon, but in the context of the 7 crowns, the blasphemy is worse. It may indicate that he will use God's name for himself and will require worship from everyone. Right away, verse 1. You know, from a Jewish perspective, to claim divinity is blasphemy. This is why the Sanhedrin condemned Yeshua. But Jesus was God, is divine. However, this one is not. Yet, the whole world will worship him. And there's an irony, by the way, for the people when they worship him. Do you see, hear what they said? Okay, verse 4, the end of verse 4. They say, who is like the beast? And who is able to wage war with him? But do you remember just before in chapter 12, verses 7 and 9, we read that Michael made war with the dragon and beat him. And do you know what Michael means? Who is like God? Right? Obviously, they did not read their Bibles. However, it is in the next verses, 5 and 6, where we begin to see the fall of the kingdom of the Antichrist. And he falls hard. This is what it says. And there was given to him a mouth, speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Is it not interesting that he has 7 heads but only 1 mouth, by the way? And see what he does at this point. He blasphemes God and those who are in heaven. First, when anyone resorts to insults and blasphemies, it is surely because he has depleted all logic and common sense. Why would he suddenly turn to God and blaspheme him and also blaspheme those who are in heaven? Do you think that heaven was disturbed by it? The reason why he's blaspheming is because I believe he is not doing that well right away. This shows his inner turmoil, for he sees that he's not getting what he wants, so he bites himself, like a snake. They say that you can cut the head of a snake from its body, and it will continue to bite and open its mouth. But since he cannot affect heaven, and he knows it, what he does in the next verse, he turns against the believers. Verse 7, it was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. This is when we see that he has only a short time. This is when he sees he has only a short time. And so he goes on a spree of destruction, attacking all those who will not take or have the mark of the beast. By the way, this mark of the beast is a mark of failure, because he couldn't control them. So he asked them to have that mark. And Daniel also spoke about this turning point during the last 2.5 years. We read in Daniel 7:21, and because he says it twice in the scriptures, because it is important. He says, and I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. The believers in both Revelation and Daniel are called saints, meaning separated, meaning sanctified. And when he will physically overpower them, he would have absolutely no power over their soul and spirits. You remember the words of Jesus in Matthew 10, do not fear those who kill the body, but are enabled to kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body. These will be the victorious ones. And it's now we come to the last section for today, Revelation 13:8. We could not end with a better encouragement. I will read it from the King James Version. He says, "And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world." Here we see a great and beautiful truth. We hear about first the book of life of the Lamb. What is this book, by the way? It is Yeshua's personal book, into which he has the names of all those redeemed by his blood, who had accepted him as his personal savior. This book existed, would you know, even before the foundation of the world was laid. And this is a great comfort for the believers. God had us in his mind even before he created the earth. And the way this passage is written, it explains to us how so many people were actually called righteous even before Jesus came. It says Yeshua was slain from the foundation of the world, meaning that his saving powers were retroactive. That means that salvation was effective back to a prior time for all who had faith in God. Now we can understand why so many are called righteous, even before the Messiah come. And by the way, today it's only through the name of Yeshua that one can come to a belief. Just like Peter says, 1 Peter 1:19-20, because this truth is repeated twice. He says, "But with the precious blood, as of a lamb, and blemished and spotless, the blood of the Messiah, for he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared in this last time for the sake of you." Sake of you. This is such a powerful verse for our eternal salvation. Like an old lady, full of joyous confidence, was asked, "But suppose you should slip through the Messiah's finger. He will forget about you, right?" And so she replies, "But I am one of his fingers." Yeah. Perhaps this is why Yeshua says right after, "If anyone has an ear, let him hear." Verse 9. These words are in the present tense. They are for anyone reading these words at their own time of existence. We remember that this phrase concluded the message for each of the 7 churches, and now he again calls our attention to this timeless truth in our eternity with God. And the last verse, I want to tell you, is very touching. Verse 10. "If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints." This is such an encouragement for the believers who will undergo the tribulation, even for us when we undergo some difficult times. In there, they learn that God will keep his eyes on them, on us, no matter what. This verse, while it acts as an encouragement, it also is a warning to the persecutors. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. This is based on the principle given by God in Genesis 9:5. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood will be shed. That is, everything will be judged at the right time. Amen. Let us bow our head for prayer. Now to us from him who is, and who was, and is to come, from Yeshua HaMashiach, who is the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth. Now may God grant us such as we may say like David, "You are my hiding place. You protect me from all trouble." Heavenly Father, you did not leave this world alone. You did not leave us alone, nor as a whole, nor as not a single one of us. You sought us. You sought us out and found us. And you brought us to salvation. And we thank you for that. B'Shem Yeshua Mashiach. And to the congregation, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord makes his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Hallelujah, Adonai, kol goyim. Shabechu kol ha'umim. Ki gafar aleinu chasto, ve'emet Adonai le'olam. Hallelujah, hallelujah. ואמת אדוני לעולם. הללויה, 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 הללויה. הללו את אדוני כל גויים, הללו את אדוני כל גויים. שבחו כל חרומי, שבחו כל חרומי. גבר עלינו הסתום, ואמת אדוני